going to be things that are both practical and basic and realistic. And they're the things that I continually see as potential issues in both young and experienced learners. So as a reminder, first circle, second circle, now on to the third circle. So podium presence and gestural vocabulary. And I purposefully saved this one to the end because, in my opinion, you have to have these other two things for this to be effective and meaningful. All right? So again, that's where the intersection of all that is conducting. So in the third circle, we're talking about podium presence and gestural vocabulary. How you present yourself to the ensemble is extremely important. And I'm not talking about, highbrow, weird stuff. I'm just talking simple things like how you dress, how you talk to them. The first words out of your mouth when you say a piece of instruction to the ensemble is the first word that you say a verbal filler, like or some other thing. We all have verbal fillers. We all do. One of my verbal fillers is the word basically. But I still have them. Everyone has verbal fillers. But how you present yourself to the ensemble is very important, which informs, obviously, the gestural vocabulary. Now, there might be some of you in here, I hope not, because you're here this morning and you've stuck with me for 2 hours already. So there might be some of you that may be thinking, oh, wait a minute. This is this Ivory Tower College guy that's going to tell us all about artistic conducting and things that we need to be doing with our ensembles. He just really doesn't understand, the type of group that I have. He plays the Hymn of the Symphony and we're playing variations on Twinkle Twinkle. But let me reassure you that this is not an ivory tower method. And all of you, whether you know it or not, are conducttor. Whether you accept it or not, you're conductors. And I don't say that as a moniker of status in any way. It's just, if you're a music educator standing in front of an ensemble, you're conducting them. You're a conductor. And your students benefit by your conducting. Let me say it a slightly different way. I think we would all agree that effective communication is important in an educational or musical setting. Would we not? Effective gestures, clear gestures, precise gestures are a way to help us more effectively communicate. It's not all about being artsy-fartsy and showing the highest levels of whatever. It's simply communicating with the ensemble in a more effective and hopefully clearer manner. So, we're going to get into each one of these, but I'll tell you what the six-pack is here. And that's purposefully number one, posture. Talks about podium presence and the way you present yourself. That has a lot to do with posture, and I'll explain here in just a second. Your breath and your breath. Breathing with the ensemble. Preparing the ensemble to collaborate and to make music. Eye contact, that's a big one. That's a huge one. Wrist ictus. Smaller gestures. And then finally, what to do with this, the left-hand structure. Most people are pretty good with the first five, or understand kind of how the first five can work. But this bad boy is kind of the great unknown for a lot of folks. So what I want to do today is give you some very easy to incorporate ideas on ways that your conducting can be improved simply by these 6 things. Some of which, like we talked about in the last session, some of these things you're going to be able to do tomorrow or Monday, and you'll be on task to, and you'll be able to immediately incorporate. Some of them will be longitudinal fixes that you can start to implement, but it may be a little bit before you see the desired result, just like they're doing with their own playing and their own performance. Okay, need a volunteer? I don't care who. Come on. So even though we've met a couple of different times And even though we've had some interactions that have been very pleasant, at least I think they have been, we are going to meet for the first time. And I'm going to demonstrate the importance of posture. Okay? So you're going to come to me and introduce yourself to me. Okay?
Hi, my name's Chris. Nice to meet you.
Okay. Now, Chris, did I make a good first impression on you?
No.
Why?
Because you were slouched over, you didn't even look me in the eye, I just kind of felt, like you were just like,
Good. Good, thank you, Chris. They make a transfer here, particularly those of you that have been to conventions or conferences. Don't you love it when you're having an interaction with someone that you don't see that frequently, and you start to have a conversation with them, and after about 4 exchanges, they look around and are looking for someone else more important to talk to, as opposed to finishing the dialogue with you? What kind of impression does that make? Not a particularly strong, okay? Conversely, when I was meeting Chris for the first time, and I was this, what does that say about me in terms of, my readiness to communicate? Not a whole lot, okay? It makes me seem very introverted, makes me seem like I'm not ready to collaborate or do anything. I'm very much in my own sort of world here. So, in terms of posture, the first thing is stand tall. And I don't mean any sort of ridiculousness like you're artificially, inflating yourself. I'm not talking about that. I'm just simply saying stand tall, stand up straight. This is a silly analogy that our choral colleagues across the hall frequently make, and I always sort of roll my eyes, but it's a good one. Where they're like, when you're singing, pretend as though you have a hook on the top of your head, and a little string is on the hook, and someone is gently pulling the string, and you're like, so you all are smiling because you all have heard this before, right? It's the same kind of thing with posture, all right? Stand tall. Now here's one other thing. Do I look like I'm giving you my full attention right now? I'm looking at you. But I'm looking at you. Right? But do I look like I'm really able or ready or willing to communicate with you?
no.
Well, maybe, but not fully. On the other hand, now I do. Okay. So when you're leading with your torso, this makes you available to communicate. And I'm not talking about, puffing your chest out and being all inflated. I'm just simply saying this makes you available to communicate with someone and with an ensemble if you're this way versus this way or this way. So stand tall, lead with the torso. The other thing that I see a lot of folks do is this. Do I look like I'm ready to effectively communicate with you? I'm doing what I said in terms of standing tall and making myself available as far as torso and giving you my energy, but I have this thing in the way now. Okay? So this is too tall because it's totally inhibiting communication. And the angle, by the way, even this makes a difference. A little better, but still too tall. Now we. Again, I don't want to legislate this thing because everybody has their own personal preference, but I will say this. If this is too tall or at the wrong angle, it's going to stop communication. It will. My rule of thumb for how high the music stand should be, I try to always keep it parallel or very close to parallel to the floor, and I want it tall enough that I can turn pages with my left hand and not have to bend down. So and I usually check that. If I'm like going to a new place or something, I'll go up to the podium and I'll kind of just, it's not like I'm being all weird, I'm just kind of determining, okay, is that the right music stand height? Okay? And folks, the same thing is true for the podium. Let's do our little Mary had a little lamb example again. Right, Drew? Mary. Fine.
Mary.
Now, immediately you were like, right? Because I'm fairly tall anyway, and when your podium is too tall or not tall enough, that's going to affect the way that you communicate. So some of you I know have winger podiums that have like this, system in place where there's one or two or whatever. It doesn't matter as long as it's the right height for you, so that you can be able to effectively communicate with the ensemble. That's the more important thing. It doesn't matter, what shape, size. It just needs to be the right height so that you can communicate. I think I covered all that. Okay, good. All right. Going on. Second thing. Starting the ensemble. Need another volunteer. Start them and lead them in the singing of Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Try that again. Mary had a little lamb.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you. Now, once you had their attention, what was one of the first things that you did?
Glance, make sure everybody has contact.
Okay, good. And what was the next thing?
Make sure I have contact with them,
Okay.
and then I, there,
How, specifically?
open breath,
Exactly.
audible.
Exactly. Thank you. Okay. So here's the deal. When we're breathing with the ensemble, we want to breathe in a way that is modeling the correct behavior for the ensemble. In other words, as a wind player, you're not going to do this as a player. You just won't. But how many times have you heard conductors, music educators, they model that as the breath and preparatory gesture? Do you know why that is? Lottie? Do you know why that is? And, yes, and. Anybody else want to chime in? Trust. They don't trust the group. I want to make sure you do it. So I'm going to really overemphasize it. Which is not modeling good behavior. That's not what we want our students, that's not how we want our students to take a breath. So we want to model that in the right way. So open breath, just exactly the way you modeled it, no problem. One other thing here, and I hope I'm not offending anybody by this one either. Counting off is counterproductive. Do you want to know why students don't watch us as effectively or as much as we would like? Because we train them not to watch. Even though we frequently say, watch me. Here's the behavior. Everybody have your hands ready like you're going to clap.
Let's see.
You guys ready? Clap when you think you need to. Thank you. 1, 2, ready, go. Okay? Close your eyes now. 1, 2, ready, go. Does that tell you all you need to know? You weren't even watching me, and you knew where to come in. Now make the transfer here. If you are giving your students a steady diet of count-off, you are not directly saying it, but you're saying to them indirectly, you don't have to watch me, you can just listen. Which listening is a good skill, to be sure. But when we constantly count off to our students, we're training them not to watch us. It's just that simple. So I challenge you, if you like to count off to your group, stop that, or at least reduce it. Now, I occasionally will count off a group. Sometimes it's just you're in the heat of a rehearsal, you're in the white hot moment of trying to drill something or work on something. Yes, I don't want to stand in front of you and lie saying, I never count off in front of the group. That would be hypocrisy. No. But I would say that's like 5% of the time. I try very hard not to count off to the group because I'm trying to encourage communication. I'm trying to encourage them to watch. And as we just demonstrated, if you count off all the time, you're telling them that you don't need to watch because they can just listen for the count. And one other thing, I always appreciate, I think it's John D. Rockefeller when he had Standard Oil, I think it was what this little story was. It was how 60 drops of oil could seal a barrel or something like that. When he realized that 59 drops could do the job, over the course of time, that one less drop adds up to how much? Those few seconds that you spend counting off over the course of a week, month, a year, how much rehearsal time does that get you back? Maybe a fair amount, maybe not much of it, but be aware of that. The other thing, breathe together, perform together. I'm a very big believer in that. When we breathe together, we have a fighting chance of performing together. And we already talked about modeling characteristic breath and all that, so I won't rehash that. But I do think it's important, where I see a lot of, particularly young conductors, and I do this occasionally, and I'm not going to say I where they'll do this, and they don't model anything here, breath or anything, they just sort of, everything's accurate, but not having this mechanism engaged as a wind player, and you're taking a breath in. I mean, so to model that is not necessarily the most effective. Okay. So, number 3. We just talked about how counting off prevents this. But eye contact is the most important part, or excuse me, the most expressive part of our face. If you have the ability to say that the most expressive part of your face is your nose, then you should go on America's Got Talent, because you're probably like 1 in a billion that has that ability. And most of us do not have the ability to contract the cartilage and facial skeletal muscles around our nose to make it any sort of expressive content. Cheekbone, there's another one. Chin, maybe. Mouth, yeah, we can do a lot of things with our mouth. My 12-year-old daughter, Gwen, who's going on 20, says that I have this expression with her that she just calls the mouth. She says, Dad, I know that I'm in trouble because you gave me the mouth. And I didn't even say a word, it's just this. Mouth, right? But, so that's expressive, no question. But the most expressive is right here. Eyes. Okay? If we are constantly here, we may be doing absolutely glorious, wonderful, most artistic motions kinesthetically with our hands, wrist, arms, whatever, ictus, all that. But if my focus of attention is here, there's a whole lot of information that I'm not giving you, simply because my focus is here as opposed to here, if that makes sense. The other thing about our eyes, it can be extremely helpful when you start a piece, stop a piece, and communicate with a soloist. Think about yourselves from when you're getting ready to play a solo. I'm not going to ask anybody to do this, but just imagine if I was to ask you to sing Mary Had a Little Lamb right now. And before I did it, I didn't even acknowledge, let's say it's going to be Chris again, since we met a little bit ago. And before we start, I do this. And he's got to sing a solo. You're going to check in with me. You're going to communicate. Whereas that makes all the difference. Okay? So looking at a soloist, particularly a young player who maybe is playing their first solo, okay? Looking at them, giving them some confidence through eye contact. And lastly, through this is one of your best tools in terms of classroom management. For example, I'm just going to pick on somebody at random here. Do you know who I'm looking at? that person knows who I'm looking at. I haven't said a word to them as far as their behavior. I haven't said a word to them about anything, but they know that I'm looking at them. And not in a creepster sort of way. My attention is locked on this person right now. And they're very aware at this point of what they're doing. Exactly. Okay. And I say that not again as a, intimidation sort of thing, but looking at someone and drawing attention to, oh yeah, it changes people's focus. One other thing about this, we sometimes, having just left the collegiate environment, we think that we are chained to the podium because most of our collegiate ensemble directors never had to leave the podium for whatever reason. And as young teachers, we feel like we have to model that behavior because we saw, Professor Seifert or whomever do that. So we do that. But on the other hand, I haven't said word one to this gentleman yet, other than me just standing here. And he was on his phone a few moments ago, which I don't care. And without me saying, I really don't care. But without me saying a word about it, without me taking him to task and disciplining him in sort of way, all I had to do was just stand here for a few moments, and he immediately got on task, or at least pretended to get on task to what I was saying. So I say this in all seriousness because proximity and eye contact are very important.
Yeah, just kind of piggyback up on that. One thing I do with my group is when I set my group up, I actually put a row down the middle so I can separate them, so I can actually walk the middle and get those kids too, because a lot of times we'll just set up in those semicircles and we'll just walk around the outside, and you get no contact with those kids in the middle when they're messing up or doing something that you need to be